The clatter of silverware against porcelain was the only sound that dared to interrupt the heavy silence at the dinner table. It was Richard's mother's 70th birthday, a gathering meant to be filled with laughter and fond reminiscences, but the air in the formal dining room was thick with unspoken tensions. Sarah had always felt like an outsider in this house, a quiet observer in the loud, boisterous theater of Richard's family. They weren't unkind, not overtly, but their conversations orbited a world she was never truly a part of, a world of corporate ladders, stock portfolios, and golf handicaps. Her world was quieter. It was the scent of freshly laundered sheets, the careful budgeting that turned one income into a comfortable life, the patient hours spent helping Jijich Sin, Leo, with his physics homework until the complex equations finally clicked in his bright young mind. It was a world of unseen, unpaid, and largely unacknowledged labor. Richard, holding court at the head of the table, was in his element. He regaled his family with a story about a recent business trip to Singapore, his voice booming with the easy confidence of a man who had never doubted his own importance. Sarah listened, a small, polite smile fixed on her face. She had heard the story 3 times already. She had been the one to pack his suitcase to ensure his favorite shirts were perfectly pressed, and to handle the burst pipe in the upstairs bathroom while he was away. And the deal was massive, Richard concluded, leaning back in his chair with a satisfied sigh. It's what will pay for Leo's first year at university, that's for sure. His brother Mark raised his wine glass. To Richard, the man who makes it all happen. A chorus of, "To Richard," echoed around the table. Sarah's hand, holding her own glass, trembled slightly. She took a slow sip, the wine tasting bitter on her tongue. It was always like this. Richard was the provider, the achiever, the sun around which their family life revolved. And she was the planet, silently orbiting, her own light and warmth completely overshadowed. "You're a lucky woman, Sarah," Richard's mother, Margaret, said, her gaze sweeping over Sarah with a look that was part pity, part condescension. To have a man like Richard taking care of everything. It must be so nice not to have to worry about a thing. Sarah's smile tightened. "I manage the household," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper in the boisterous room, "and I look after Leo." Richard laughed, a loud, dismissive sound that grated on Sarah's raw nerves. "Oh, darling, we know. But that's not exactly work, is it? It's what you do. It's what women do." He turned to his family, a wide, magnanimous grin on his face. "She's wonderful, keeps the house looking lovely, hosts a great dinner party when I need her to. But when it comes to the real pressures, the real responsibilities, you do nothing, my love, and for that you should be grateful. I carry the weight so you don't have to." The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. You do nothing. It wasn't just the insult. It was the public declaration of her irrelevance. It was the casual, smiling way he erased her, her contributions, her entire existence outside of being his decorative wife. The room fell silent for a moment, the family members shifting uncomfortably in their seats. They had all heard it, the casual cruelty laced in his tone. But no one spoke up. No one defended her. Sarah felt a cold, calm resolve settle over her. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She simply placed her fork and knife neatly on her plate, the metallic click sounding like a gavel in the quiet room. Across the table, her son Leo was watching her. He was 17, on the cusp of manhood, and his eyes, so much like her own, were filled with a dawning awareness. He had heard it too. He had seen the flash of pain in her eyes, before she had carefully shuttered it away. She looked at Richard, her husband of 20 years, the man she had loved, supported, and built a life with. She looked at the smug satisfaction on his face, the complete and utter obliviousness to the wound he had just inflicted. He saw her as a dependent, a pleasant accessory to his successful life. He had no idea who she really was. He had no idea what she had done, the secrets she had kept, the silent power she wielded. For 20 years she had played the part. She had been the quiet, supportive wife. But as she sat there, stripped of her dignity in front of his entire family, she knew that the performance was over. He had said she did nothing. Soon he, and everyone else in this room, would learn just how wrong he was. The truth was a seed she had planted long ago, and it was finally, irrevocably, about to bloom. The ride home was a study in strained silence. Richard drove, humming along to a classic rock station, blissfully unaware of the storm that had just broken. He had already moved on, the incident at the dinner table nothing more than a trivial footnote in his evening. To him, the words were inconsequential, a throwaway line in a performance of his own success. He reached over and patted Sarah's knee, a gesture that was meant to be affectionate but felt proprietary, condescending. "Don't mind my mother, darling," he said, his voice smooth. "She's from a different generation. Doesn't understand our modern partnership." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Our modern partnership. The phrase was so absurd, so disconnected from their reality, that it was almost comical. She turned her head to look out the window, watching the city lights blur into streaks of gold and red. She didn't pull her knee away. She did nothing. Her stillness had become a different kind of weapon now, not of passive acceptance, but of quiet observation. She was a general on a hill, watching the enemy's movements, planning her campaign. In the back seat, Leo was silent, his earbuds in but no music playing. He was watching his parents in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed. He had seen the look on his grandmother's face, the dismissive wave of his uncle's hand, and the triumphant, oblivious smile on his father's. But most of all, he had seen the mask slide into place on his mother's face, a placid expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. For the first time, he was seeing the architecture of his family's life not as a stable, loving home, but as a fragile structure built on his mother's silent sacrifices. When they arrived home, Richard tossed his keys onto the hall table and headed straight for the liquor cabinet. "A nightcap to celebrate the deal," he announced to the empty hallway. Sarah walked past him, her steps measured and deliberate. "I'm a little tired, Richard. I think I'll go up." "Of course, my love." "You rest?" he said, already pouring a generous measure of scotch. "You've earned it." She paused on the bottom step, her back to him. "You've earned it." He had no idea. In the sanctuary of their bedroom, Sarah did not get ready for bed. She walked over to her antique writing desk, a piece she had bought for herself years ago, with money she'd told Richard was a small inheritance from a distant aunt. It was a lie, but one of many small, necessary deceptions. She unlocked a drawer with a tiny silver key she wore on a chain around her neck, hidden beneath her clothes. Inside, there was a simple, leather-bound ledger and a series of bank statements. It was not a diary of feelings, but a meticulous record of numbers, transactions, and growth. For 15 years, ever since Leo was 2, Sarah had been working. Not in an office, not for a boss, but for herself. It had started small. She had a talent for seeing patterns, for understanding markets, a skill she'd honed in a university business course she had taken before she met Richard. She'd dropped out when they got engaged, convinced by Richard that he would provide for them, that she wouldn't need a career of her own. Her first investment was with the inheritance money, a few $1,000s, carefully placed in an emerging tech company no one had heard of. She had researched it for months, reading prospectus reports at the library while Leo was in a toddler music class. The investment had doubled, then tripled. She had sold, reinvested, and diversified. She traded in the quiet hours of the early morning before Richard and Leo woke up, and in the afternoons while Leo was at school. Her office was the local library, her tools a library computer and a secret email address. She had built a portfolio that would have shocked Richard, a fortune that rivaled, and perhaps even surpassed, his own. She had done it all in secret, not out of shame, but out of a need for it to be hers. It was the one part of her life that Richard couldn't touch, couldn't claim, couldn't belittle. It was her safety net, her proof of worth, her silent rebellion. A soft knock came at the door. "Mom?" Sarah quickly closed the ledger and shut the drawer, her heart pounding. "Come in, Leo." Her son entered, his tall frame looking awkward in the doorway. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice hesitant. What Dad said, it wasn't right. Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes, hot and sudden. This was the validation she hadn't known she was so desperate for. Not from Richard's family, but from her son. She patted the spot on the bed beside her. He came and sat down, his presence a comforting weight. "Thank you for saying that, sweetheart," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He doesn't see what you do," Leo continued, looking at his hands. "He takes credit for everything. The trip to Singapore, he said it was to pay for my university." He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. Is that true?" Sarah looked at her son, her brilliant, compassionate son, who saw so much more than his father ever would. The lie was on the tip of her tongue, the easy, practiced response to protect Richard's pride, but the words from the dinner table echoed in her mind. "You do nothing." The performance was over. She took a deep breath. "No, Leo," she said, her voice clear and steady. "That's not true at all." Leo stared at her, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning comprehension. The simple denial hung in the air between them, dismantling a foundational belief of his entire life, that his father was the sole provider, the architect of their family's fortune. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "The deal. The Singapore trip. He's been talking about it for months." Sarah gave a small, sad smile. "Oh, the deal is real, I'm sure. And your father is very good at his job. He makes a good living for us." She paused, choosing her words with the same precision she used to choose her stocks. "But what he earns, it covers the mortgage, the cars, the holidays. It maintains our lifestyle. It doesn't build wealth. It doesn't secure a future. That," she said, her voice dropping, "is something else entirely." She felt a surge of adrenaline, a dizzying mix of fear and liberation. The secret she had guarded so fiercely for 15 years was finally seeing the light, and it was to the one person whose opinion truly mattered. She stood up and walked back to the writing desk. With a steady hand, she unlocked the drawer again. This time, she didn't hide the contents. She pulled out the leather-bound ledger and a thick file of bank statements and portfolio summaries. She laid them on the bed beside Leo. "For 15 years, she began, her voice gaining strength with every word, "I have been managing a private investment portfolio. It started with a small amount of money I told your father was an inheritance. But it grew. I studied Leo. I read every financial paper I could get my hands on. I learned about market trends, algorithms, and emerging technologies. I did it from the library on a pay-as-you-go phone in the hours when everyone assumed I was doing, well, nothing." Leo tentatively reached for the top document, a summary from a well-known investment firm. His eyes widened as he saw the numbers. It wasn't just a comfortable nest egg, it was a substantial fortune. The figures were staggering, dwarfing the annual salary he knew his father earned. He flipped through the pages, seeing the names of companies he recognized, tech giants and innovative startups. He saw the dates of the trades, the profits, the losses, the slow, steady, and brilliant accumulation of wealth. You did all this?" he stammered, looking from the papers to his mother's face. He was seeing her for the first time, not just as mom, the maker of meals, the finder of lost things, the calm center of his world, but as a brilliant, powerful woman. "I did," Sarah said, a lifetime of suppressed pride finally finding its voice. "The down payment for this house wasn't just from your father's bonus. Half of it was from my portfolio. The private schools you attended, the summer camps, the tutors. Your father's salary helped, but my investments guaranteed they were never a financial strain. We never had to worry. He never had to worry. He just assumed his income was stretching further than it was." She sat down next to him again. "Your university education, Leo. It has been fully funded since you were 10 years old. It's in a trust, untouchable, waiting for you. The money from your father's Singapore deal is irrelevant. Your future is secure because I made it secure." Leo was speechless. He thought back to all the times his father had lectured him about the cost of things, the pressure he was under. He thought about the family dinners, the endless praise heaped upon Richard for his financial acumen, while his mother sat silently, smiling her polite, enigmatic smile. It wasn't the smile of a contented dependent. It was the smile of a secret keeper, a queen moving her pieces on a board no one else could see. "But why?" Leo finally asked, his voice full of genuine curiosity. "Why keep it a secret? Dad would have, well, I don't know what he would have done." "Exactly," Sarah said softly. "You don't know. And neither do I. In the beginning, I hid it because I was afraid he would disapprove, that he would feel his pride was wounded. He wanted to be the provider. It was his identity. So, I let him have it. I created this space for myself, this thing that was mine and mine alone." She looked at the ledger, her hand resting on its worn cover. "But over the years, it became something more. It became my proof. Proof to myself that I was more than a wife and a mother. That the mind that got me a scholarship to university didn't just disappear because I got married. Your father, he loves me in his way. But he doesn't respect me. He sees my contributions as negligible, as the default setting for a woman. Tonight, when he said I did nothing, he wasn't trying to be cruel. He genuinely believes it. And I realized I have allowed him to believe it for far too long." Leo reached out and took his mother's hand. His was large and strong, but hers felt stronger. "He was wrong, Mom," he said, his voice firm. "He was so wrong." Sarah squeezed his hand, a real, genuine smile finally breaking through. It felt like the sun after a long winter, The validation she craved hadn't come from the man she married, but from the boy she had raised. And in that moment, she knew she had all the strength she needed for what was to come. "I know," she said, "and I think it's time he knew it too. But it has to be on our terms. On my terms." The seed of a plan was beginning to form, no longer just a vague idea of rebellion, but a clear strategic move. The next morning, the house felt different, charged with a new energy that only Sarah and Leo could perceive. Richard, however, noticed nothing. He came down for breakfast, dressed in one of his finest suits, smelling of expensive cologne and self-satisfaction. "You seem well rested, darling," he commented as he buttered his toast. "See? I told you there's nothing to worry about. I take care of things." Sarah simply poured him a cup of coffee, her movements fluid and calm. "I slept wonderfully," she replied, her voice even. Across the table, Leo caught her eye and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. The silent communication was a new language between them, a secret alliance forged in the late hours of the night. Richard, engrossed in the financial news on his tablet, missed it completely. After he left for work, the real planning began. Sarah and Leo sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she had helped him with homework for years. Now, he was her partner, her confidant. "I could just confront him," Leo said, his youthful indignation still burning hot. "I could show him the statements. I could tell everyone." Sarah shook her head gently. "And what would that accomplish?" "He would be humiliated, yes. He would be angry. It would be a messy, ugly fight. Your father's pride is a fortress, Leo. A direct assault will only make him build the walls higher. He won't learn. He'll just deflect and retaliate." "So we do nothing?" Leo asked, the words tasting like ash. "No," Sarah said, a spark in her eye. "We don't do nothing. We create a moment of undeniable truth, a moment where he can't argue or boast his way out of it. The question has to be asked, but it can't come from me. If I ask it, I'm just the bitter, resentful wife. But if it comes from you," Leo began to understand. "It's different." "It's everything," Sarah confirmed. "It's the heir to the kingdom asking the king to see his treasury. It's a genuine question about the future, your future." They decided to wait for the right opportunity. It didn't take long. A week later, flush with the success of his trip and the praise from his family, Richard decided they should host another family dinner. "A proper celebration this time," he declared. "We'll have the whole family over. We can toast to my success and to Leo's bright future." The irony was so thick Sarah could almost taste it. "That sounds like a lovely idea, dear," she said, her voice perfectly placid. The day of the dinner, Sarah moved with a quiet purpose she hadn't felt in years. She prepared a beautiful meal, the kind of effortless entertaining Richard took for granted. She selected a fine wine. She set the table with the good china. To an outside observer, she was the perfect hostess, the dutiful wife. But to Leo, she was a strategist preparing the battlefield. As the family arrived, the scene from the previous week replayed, but the emotional landscape had been redrawn. Richard's mother, Margaret, gave Sarah the same dismissive peck on the cheek. Richard's brother, Mark, clapped him on the back, loudly congratulating him again. Richard soaked it all in. The conquering hero returned. Sarah smiled and played her part, but there was no tremor in her hand this time as she held her wine glass. There was no tightness in her chest. There was only a profound, crystalline calm. She was no longer a victim in this play. She was its director. They sat down to dinner. The conversation, as always, was dominated by Richard. He spoke of the markets, of his plans for expansion, of the new car he was thinking of buying. "We have to enjoy the fruits of my labor, after all," he said with a grand wave of his hand. Margaret looked at Sarah. "You must be so proud, Sarah. Richard works so hard for you and Leo." "Immensely proud," Sarah said, her eyes locking with her mother-in-law's. Her gaze didn't waver. For the first time, it was Margaret who looked away, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Richard, meanwhile, turned his attention to his son. "And you, Leo? University is just around the corner. It costs a fortune, you know. But don't you worry. Your father has it all under control. That Singapore deal? It's paying for your education, lock, stock, and barrel." This was it. This was the moment they had rehearsed. The cue had been given. Sarah took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine. She didn't look at Leo, but she could feel his energy shift beside her. The entire table was looking at Richard, beaming, impressed. The silence was his to own. Then, into that silence, Leo's clear, calm voice dropped the question they had so carefully prepared. It was not angry. It was not accusatory. It was simply curious, A son asking his father a simple, straightforward question. "That's amazing, Dad," Leo said, his eyes fixed on his father. "But I was talking to Mom the other night about the finances for school, and I'm a little confused. She mentioned a trust fund that's been set up for years. So I was just wondering, who actually pays for my school?" The silence that fell over the table was of a different quality than before. It was not heavy with unspoken tension, but sharp and brittle with shock. Every eye swiveled from Leo to Richard. Richard blinked, a forkful of roasted potatoes halfway to his mouth. He let out a short, confused laugh, looking to Sarah as if for an explanation to a poorly delivered joke. "A trust fund? What are you talking about, son?" he asked, his voice attempting its usual booming confidence but coming out strained. "Some little savings account your mother put together for you? That's sweet, darling," he said, nodding at Sarah. "But it's hardly enough for a top-tier university. No, no. The real money, the heavy lifting, that's what my deal has taken care of." Sarah placed her wine glass on the table, the small sound echoing in the stillness. She looked directly at her husband, her expression not of anger or triumph, but of simple, irrefutable fact. "He's talking about the Atherton Trust," she said, her voice perfectly clear and audible to everyone at the table. "I established it 10 years ago. It matured last year. It contains more than enough to cover his tuition, accommodation, and living expenses for the next 4 years at any Ivy League school he chooses. Your Singapore money can be a lovely bonus for you, Richard, but it is not, and never has been, required for Leo's education." Richard's face, flushed with wine and self-congratulation, began to pale. He stared at Sarah, truly seeing her for the first time that evening, and perhaps the first time in their marriage. He saw not the quiet, agreeable woman who managed his home, but a stranger with a will of iron and secrets he couldn't fathom. You established it?" he stammered, his bravado crumbling into dust. "With what money? The housekeeping allowance?" He looked around the table, seeking an ally, but found only stunned, confused faces. His mother, Margaret, was staring at Sarah, her mouth slightly agape. Mark looked as if he'd been slapped. "The money I made," Sarah said calmly. "While you were at work, I was also at work. While you were building your career, I was building a fortune. The fortune that paid for half of this house. The fortune that meant we never had to dip into our savings for a new car or a school trip. The fortune that has been quietly underpinning the comfortable life you believe you alone provided." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The quiet, methodical way she dismantled his entire life's narrative was more devastating than any shout could ever be. She was not a bitter wife complaining. She was a CEO delivering a final brutal report. I don't believe you," Richard whispered, but his voice lacked all conviction. The ledger, the bank statements, he knew, with a sudden, gut-wrenching certainty, that she had proof. He remembered all the years of her quiet afternoons, her library visits, her unexplained peacefulness in the face of his financial anxieties. It all clicked into place, forming a picture of a life he had been completely oblivious to. "You do nothing," he had told her. The words hung in the air, a monument to his own arrogance and ignorance. He had paraded his success, his power as the provider, while she, in secret, had been the true architect of their security. Leo, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. "It's true, Dad," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I've seen it. Mom didn't just look after me. She secured my entire future. You just didn't notice." The finality in his son's voice was the blow that broke him. Richard slumped back in his chair, the life seeming to drain out of him. He looked old, and for the first time, small. He had built his identity on being the provider, the man who carried all the weight. In a single devastating moment, he discovered the weight had been shared, and he had never even known it. His grand narrative was a fiction. The dinner ended in a flurry of awkward, mumbled excuses. Richard's family couldn't leave fast enough, escaping the wreckage of the image they had all so comfortably bought into. Left in the quiet of the dining room, amidst the remains of a celebratory feast that had turned into a tribunal, Sarah, Richard, and Leo sat in the silence. Richard wouldn't meet Sarah's eyes. He just stared at his plate, a broken man. "So what now?" he finally asked the tablecloth, his voice raspy. "Now," Sarah said, standing up and beginning to clear the plates with a steady hand. "We start telling the truth. We become real partners. Or we don't. But the performance is over. I am done being the silent, invisible woman who does nothing. From now on, you will see me. You will acknowledge me. Because without me, you would have had a very different life." She walked into the kitchen, Leo following to help her. Richard remained at the head of the table, alone, in the house she had helped buy, at the end of a life he had never truly understood. The future was an unknown territory, but for the first time in 20 years, Sarah felt truly free, her own person at last, her value no longer a secret to be hidden, but a truth to be lived.